Welcome to another episode of Inside the SCCA. Brian Bielanski here, and it's time for another show. And this is going to be a good one. This is one I've been trying to do for quite some time, and timing has been tough because of the move and everything. But it's one of those shows that I'm like, this could ruffle some feathers. I didn't say that before I got Jon on here, but because then he would have run off and not wanted to talk to me. But my guest here, Jon Krolewicz from SCCA, Senior Manager of Regional Track Development, right?
I think you might have left out a couple words, but it's okay because that would take the entire time of the podcast if we said my entire title.
All right. Well, after I ask you the first question, I'm going to put you on what we call a one-shot, and I'll have a title, and your whole title will hopefully be correct on there. So, all right. So the show we're going to do tonight is about race experience, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But the first thing I always heard, I thought was, and I could hear SCCA members, longtime members go, race experience, what is this? We don't need a license crap. Yeah, we're going to get into all of that. Jon's like, I got to run. It's time to run. But before you get to run, Jon, I'm going to ask you the first question that I ask all first-time guests, and that is, how'd you get mixed up in that sport that we love?
Oh, man, that could also be its own show, right? So I'll do the Reader's Digest version of it. I used to get, when I was a very little kid, my mom would buy me, Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars that had the number of whatever age I was turning, which got me into race cars. That led to a book report in the third grade. That led to falling in love with the Indy 500. I started going to the Indy 500, coming up on my 41st one of those in a row.
Awesome.
And then at some point I said, you know what, I kind of want to go drive. And with that, met some folks in the SCCA, carts and crewing and, region leadership, got to, where I was doing, pro driving, running my own track day. And Hayward Wagner called me one day and said, hey, we're going to start this program called Track Night in America. And I need somebody that knows the track day world and knows SCCA and its politics. And I think that's you. And I said, let's go do it. And so there's how I got into racing and how I got into SCCA. There's all kinds of things, but that's the short abridged answer.
So I did a show, an SCCA Super Tour here a couple of weeks ago with a guy who you probably know pretty well then, Tom O.
I just had a few minutes of dinner with Tom O on this past Friday night. We were at VIR. I was driving. He was coaching. I went into a restaurant and he crashed my table and sat down. So nice. Tom O and I have spent a tremendous amount of time together, traveling around the country, doing Track Night in America, World Challenge, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess that Track Night in America experience, we're going to get to this a whole lot more in a minute because I still want to talk about all your background. But the Track Night in America experience is kind of like the entry drug to what we're here to talk about tonight, which is race experience, because they kind of go hand in hand, in my opinion, in a really good way. I know I told you we're going to stir the crap today and we're going to get people ruffled, but don't get me wrong. I think that race experience is a fantastic idea, and we're going to go through all those reasons why in just a few minutes. But let's go through that. So your family took you to the Indy 500. My grandpa did the same thing with my dad back in the day. This would be back in the 50s. And then when my dad said, I want to go racing, my grandpa looked at him like he had four heads. Like, Grandpa, this was your fault. You're the guy who took him to the Indy 500. Why would you not expect that he wants to be a race car driver? Did you have any pushback from the family?
No, I didn't. There were some tough conversations when, you spend time around racetracks long enough, you might be around some bad days.
Yeah.
And I had some tough conversations with the family about what it means to be in the car, what it means to me, what it means to them to have me in that situation. But no pushback. And in fact, my family has been super supportive. My dad is, most often my crew chief. He's a school teacher, so not a lot in the way of checks to be written, but a tremendous amount of time spent, working on the cars with me, coming to the racetrack, pushing the grid, getting them ready to go, those kind of things.
Yeah. So I was lucky because my dad had that experience with his dad. And then when it was my turn, my dad's like, well, I can't be that way to my kid because I didn't like it when my dad was that way to me. So I didn't have to worry about that part. I just didn't have a lot of money to go racing. So that was my problem, which I'm sure is a lot of the same story for a lot of other people. When you finally got into cars, how did you get into it?
So my dad I mentioned him being a school teacher. One of the things he would do on weekends is do freelance writing and photography for some newspapers down here. I live in South Carolina. So he would get credentials and go work as media at probably a dozen NASCAR and a couple of IndyCar events a year. And so I've found ways to sneak into garage areas and meet names that are absolute legends and be around some tremendously fun, events. So that's where I got into kind of understanding what the world of racing was.
Right.
And then one day I was at a test event at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and what was I, 14? And, all of the people that I knew, even some of the ones in racing, like you meet Richard Petty and they're tall and they're big and they're football player size. And I was at this test session and I met John Andretti, and I went, wait a minute, this is a person that's the same height as me and the same size as me. Maybe I can do this. And so from there, my dad had a friend that was running what at the time was Formula 440 in the SCCA, which of course is F600 now. And it was his advice that he said, look, you should come crew, you should come to SCCA events, but at your age, you want to go do go-karts, right? Go get in a racing cart. Because at the time I was trying to decide whether was I going to go get a dirt track car? Was I going to start doing ovals or what was I going to do? And so he pointed me towards the karts and started doing that, started crewing for SCCA. Folks, Chuck Cecil down here in the Southeast, who is the RE in a Formula Continental.
Yep.
And it kind of spiraled from there.
Yeah. Cool story. So you grew up in South Carolina?
Yep, sure did.
So how did you get mixed up with IndyCar? I mean, you grew up in the middle of NASCAR country.
I did. I told you about the book report I did, and the book that I picked up off the shelf in my elementary school. The first chapter was on IndyCar racing and the Indy 500, and the second chapter was on Formula One, and the third chapter was on Le Mans, the fourth chapter was on NASCAR, and the fifth was on NHRA. Like I could still give that book report today. It made such an impression. And so that was my exposure, was in that order. Wow. My dad is from up north, up in New England. And so when I came home talking about AJ Foyt and Mario Andretti and the Indy 500, that made sense to him. And so that's why the Indy 500.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I also am Jon Andretti height. I'm no longer Jon Andretti's size, but I used to tell people I'm the right height to be a race car driver. I'm just not the right width. So that's always been my constant struggle. Once you got into racing cars, what was your first car?
First car, we'll go with the autocross situation, which was a Honda CRX, a 1987 CRX SI that I bought with had a broken timing belt, so some bent valves, and that's how I could afford that thing, which I promptly fixed and then took autocrossing. My first wheel-to-wheel race car was a 1983 Van Diemen Formula Ford.
Okay. And what was your success like in your SCCA life?
Never as good as I wanted it to be, but I was there, going through the motions, learning about racing, learning about the rhythm of, how the kind of environment breathes on a race weekend. Having the CRX knowledge led me to a really lucky break with a shop down in Charleston, South Carolina, that was building an e-production car.
Okay.
And one of their customers, David, he said, hey, I know a guy that knows CRXs. You should call him to help. They called me to help. I happened to also have the national competition license. And then that team said, hey, would you like to come have a job working our counter and driving our race car? And, that was sort of a watershed moment for me,
Yeah.
where I hadn't really done a lot in the Formula Ford, not in terms of success, in terms of winning and championships like folks that we know, but being able to have that experience and then climb in that race car and go have success in that race car was a pretty was kind of the changing moment, and that got me attention from an IMSA team that was there in town, Autometrics, and one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden you're in kind of the whirlpool that it is pro racing.
Yeah. Was racing cars career the really something you thought about, something about you dreamed about, or was it like the only option?
It was the only option. I mean, I would say all of the above, but they did an article on me when SCCA had the Speed Freaks program back in the
Right.
late 90s and early 2000s. And the inset quote they ran was, "No movies, no CDs, no prom, just racing."
Right.
Because that's what at the time, if I spent $10 on a CD or $5 on a movie or went and, got a tuxedo, that was money that wasn't going into tires, gas, and entry fees.
Yeah. Great idea. Yeah. So at some point in time, you get to this track night thing, but you said you had some track day experience. Did you run a track day business before you came to SSCA?
Yeah, I did. I ran a program out of Roebling Road Raceway in
Okay.
Georgia that I called Seat Time Driving Days,
Okay.
and I did that. I had been on my region board in South Carolina region, and they were finishing their road races fairly early, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and like, hey, the beer party started at 3, and I'm sitting there going, well, that's 2 hours of track time, and was trying to lobby the region to do some track day programs. And at that time, in the early 2000s, NASA had not expanded to a national organization yet. There were a couple of what I'd call non-denominational track days, but most of them were the marquee clubs, Porsche Club and BMW Club. And when the region said, "Hey, no, we don't want to do that, we're road racing," I said, "You know what? I need to start making money at this racing thing. So I think I'm going to go rent the racetrack." So I started 10 Fridays a year and went for a while like that, running my own track day program.
And you were lucky that you were in that area because Roebling is one of the most affordable tracks in the country. I think even today still to rent.
I would imagine it is. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it does cost per day, but at the time it was really, really reasonable.
Yeah.
And so, and getting to do that, and even though it was owned by an SCCA region, it's owned by the Buccaneer region of the SCCA. Because SCCA is not a track day, or certainly at that point was not a track day organization, they didn't even have a lot of feet in that fire, so to
Sure.
speak, and they were so it worked out as a pretty good relationship for both the track and me to be able to go in there and do that and start that program.
Well, it also gives you an opportunity to keep your overhead low to prove that this concept works before you could then go and charge more money to go to bigger and better places, right?
Yeah, and I never expanded that from bigger racetracks.
Okay.
It was the thing that, with my own racing taking up a lot of time,
Sure.
I was balancing running that day with also being able to go drive other stuff, other events,
Right.
and it worked pretty well for me. So I think I went to one other track once, but didn't do a lot of expansion beyond that.
Got it. Got it. All right, tell me about the pro racing stuff. What was the stuff that you did with the pro side?
Yes, so got at Marsh Point Motorsports, which is the group down in Charleston that I was driving and working for. We had sort of I don't want to call it a technical partnership, but sort of a friendship with Autometrics down there, and they were doing what at the time was Grand Am. Talked to them about getting in their Porsche. I went and got some sponsorship. The Porsche filled up before I got the sponsorship, at which point I had a check and no car, and so I started calling around to other IMSA teams and found CZO Florida Racing. They actually had a prototype, which for me felt like a big step on paper. When I got in the car, I felt really comfortable in it. The formula cars, the stuff that I'd done, the race car, the karting that I'd done, it didn't feel that much different, even though this car was faster. Actually, at one point in the test, they said, "You're doing really well." And I went, "Yeah, this car is so fast, I don't have time to think about what I'm doing," which turns into it makes Roebling Road feel like an autocross course, and
Yeah.
and that I can deal with. No, it certainly was different than that as I went to other places, but drove for them a little bit, and then beyond that, ran what is now Michelin Cup and is was at the time Coney Challenge, and then had got a World Challenge start under my belt in about 2005 or 2004. I started kind of meeting folks with the time attack stuff, big supercars and wings. AMS out of Chicago, who'd been doing drag racing stuff, wanted to go do time attack. And I'd been in an Evo a little bit. A buddy of mine, we'd gone and done one lap of America in it.
Sure.
And so I went and helped them start their time attack car program. Drove for them for a few years. So some of the pro stuff, the actual pro stuff where you're getting paid instead of being, instead of bringing the money and then hoping there's some left over at the end of the weekend, was in that time attack world.
Right, right. So things haven't changed much. Is if you have a check waiting for someone to cash it, you can find a ride, can't you?
Yeah, you can. I never like to act like it is just money
Right.
that gets you there. And certainly when you think about a lot of the front running guys that you see at these tracks, in these series, they are exceptionally good race car drivers. It's not about money, but
Sure.
you have to have that skill and you do have to have that money. And very often the money can provide the opportunities to build the skill.
Right.
So that's that is a maddeningly frustrating process at times. But still one that I try to look at it as, if you want to go be a lawyer, you want to go be a doctor, tuition is not cheap. And
Right.
if you want to go be a race car driver, tuition is certainly not cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like a lot of pro drivers today with the time attack stuff, you're not making your living typically driving race cars. You're doing other car stuff to be able to pay the rent and put food on the table to then let you have the opportunity to have a free weekend to go racing in a pro car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's, the track day program was that, right? Can I make enough money to
Right.
at least have the cabinet stuffed with ramen noodles and then get to go to the race? That driver coaching, getting into where somebody says, "Hey, I want you to come coach me," and you're putting down data laps for folks and doing those kind of things. So the hustle is, you try to keep the hustle in the race car space, but it's absolutely always a hustle.
When you went to do the track night thing with SCCA at the start, was that a full-time thing or was that just on a case-by-case basis?
That one's what SCCA would call an independent contract thing.
Got it.
So they paid me some amount of money per month, and I think they got about 175 hours a week out of me for whatever that was. I think I did the math once, and I said I think I'm making $3 an hour at this
Yeah.
doing this. But no, it wasn't a full-time job until 1 year into that.
Got it.
And
Got it.
even that first year was a hustle year because it was 50 to 55 track night events. And then I was also working with Racekeeper, the data acquisition company, supporting World Challenge events. So I think I was on an airplane 110 times in 2015 between those two.
To most people, that sounds like a dream come true, spending your time at the racetrack, obviously you'd rather do that than, having a root canal. But even the super tour that I travel with, plus all my Cal Club, and now I'm doing Vintage Auto Racing Association, you add all that together, and by the time I get to back home from the June sprints, I'm going to be ready for a nap.
Yeah, I did. We wrote some articles. It's the 10-year anniversary of Track Night this year. And Tom wrote an article and I wrote an article. And I actually told about, I would go on weeks where you're getting up, or I was getting up at 3 a.m, go to an airport, fly to a city, get in a rental car, go to the racetrack, organize a track night event until 9 o'clock, get back to a hotel at 11 and wake up again at 3 the next morning to fly to the next city. And
Yeah.
Fridays were come home and fall face first onto the bed and sleep the whole day.
Yeah.
My favorite, I guess it would have been in 2016 because I was a full-time employee and we have like time cards that we were filling out to track our hours, even though we're salary. And I had like left the house at 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. to get on a flight and then go to the West Coast and then do a track night event at Willow Springs and then drove to Phoenix. And by the time I got to the hotel at like 11:30, I think it had been a 25.5 hour day, and the digital time card said you can't have a 25.5 hour day. And I was like, you most certainly can have a 25.5 hour day.
Yeah, that's when you have to end your day at 11:59 and then start your next day at 12:01. That's good stuff. Do you get to drive much now, or do you spend more time helping other people learn to drive?
More time helping other people learn to drive. One of my self slogans is I have better friends than I deserve. This past weekend, Lee Hill, former chairman of the board of the SCCA, invited me in to co-drive his Spec Racer Ford in a 65-minute actually race experience enduro. So I got to participate in my own program, but I think probably maybe half a dozen times a year if I'm lucky at this point.
Yeah. So there are different types of people in this sport. There are the people who just want to go and drive fast. There are the people who like to wrench. There are people who like to teach. There's a lot of different ways to get enjoyment from this sport. I love driving, but I love the satisfaction of building and seeing it work. Maybe not be the fastest car out there, but I like to see it work and see an improvement and a progression of what I do. How much satisfaction do you get seeing people start in this sport and then growing into proficiency or even bordering on excellence?
Oh, I'm not going to lie and say that my favorite part isn't going and winning races myself, right? Obviously, that's number one. But in lieu of that, getting to introduce people to a sport that I've seen so many sides of and met so many cool people is rewarding really beyond words, right? And I've met people at the racetrack that are legends, names that everybody knows, and I've met people at the racetrack that nobody's going to know their name. And watching the passion for it, whether you're looking at an AJ Foyt or somebody at doing their first event at a track night is just, it's really an exceptional way to be able to share, a love and a passion for all the things that are really cool about motorsports.
When I was flagging, I would keep little earplugs in my track bag, packets and packets. I could start of the year, I'd buy a box of 100. And whenever I would see a family standing at the fence, and you'd always see the kid just cringing because it was too loud. And I'm like, if that kid doesn't have a good experience, that family's never coming back. So I would pull out my earplugs and I walk over and I hand them to mom and dad. So I did this once at Lime Rock 25 years ago and struck up a conversation between sessions with mom and dad. And about a year ago, I get friended on Facebook by this kid who is now a two-time WKA national champion karting kid, and that they're going to start trying to go doing some SCCA racing. I had goosebumps that one-off meeting had just a little bit to do with this kid falling in love and this family getting involved in the sport. It's just one of the coolest things I've ever had.
Yeah, that's awesome. To get to do that, and you never know what little things will do that for somebody. Our theme of the convention this year was be inviting, was to invite, and those are exactly the kind of things that will help somebody come in. Whether it's earplugs at a fence when you're corner working, whether it's making sure you walk over to the folks you've never seen before at an autocross and saying, "Hey, I haven't seen you here before. I'm John. Thanks for coming out. Looking forward to competing with you today." You never know what little thing. And so I almost have goosebumps for you in that moment.
It was pretty cool. let's do this. I'm going to take a quick break here and thank the people who helped me do this. And then when I come back, we'll get into the reason I asked you on the show, which I'm real excited about also, because I think that will lead to more people having experiences like I just talked about. So let me do this real quick. Of course, I can't do it without the people who help me pay the bills and allow me to have fun with this all the time. William R. Penterick and Associates. That's, of course, David Penterick, our GT1 and Spec MX5 driver. He's also a great financial planner if you need help with your money to figure out what to do, retirement planning, all that kind of stuff. Check out Dave Penterick, great guy, one of our SCCAers who is a supporter of the show. Also, we want to thank the good people at, who's next? Yes, Ray Esports. I'm looking up at the thing over my shoulder to remember who to talk about next in case you're wondering why I paused. Ray Esports is the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. I love getting out there with Stevie Ray and all of his race groups on Tuesday nights and on the weekends, their Weekend Warrior programs. A lot of SCCA racers get involved, and a lot of the racing is a lot more like on-track racing in so much as that people try to be respectful. They don't try to run you over and all that other kind of stuff, which you can sometimes get in sim racing. So check them out. As well as Solar Performance Specialties. They are some great people there. They are, of course, involved with all of our Solo National Tour events. They're at Solo Nationals. They do everything from tires to belts to driving gloves and shoes, just tons of stuff having to do with the Solo world. If you need stuff from them, check them out. You can get stuff from them at an event, as well as you can check them out on their website. And then, of course, a big, huge thanks to RaceSchool.com. Of course, this is Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com. They are the presenting sponsor, and it's a huge help to have them. A lot of the upgrades that we have on the show are thanks to all the folks at RaceSchool.com being on board. So they've got schools out at Buttonwillow and at Willow Springs, and of course we have 2 tracks now at Buttonwillow, so lots of different opportunities, both an SCCA licensing school as well as defensive driving and all that kind of stuff. If you have a teen, by the way, who is just starting out driving, I absolutely suggest that you take them to a defensive driving school and one done at the racetrack. They'll think that's cool, so they'll actually want to do it. So go check those folks out, and raceschool.com is their website, so check them out. All of our partners, all of their information is in the show notes, and if you do check them out, tell them you found out about them on Inside the SCCA. All right, back now with Jon Krolewicz. We're talking about a lot of cool stuff. John, I think you and I could probably talk for another hour about all the other stuff you've done. But
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, but we are here for race experience. Now, I've been in this game probably about the same amount of time as you have. You might be a little younger than me. But the idea that you can do an SCCA race and not have to have a license is, to many members, like committing a cardinal sin. Like, they can't even wrap their brains about, well, we can't let anybody on the racetrack without going through a school. But a lot of organizations do it successfully from a safety standpoint. That doesn't mean crazy things don't happen, but it's a learning process. And I've seen some people who have had SCCA license for decades do stupid shit on the racetrack. And I can say that because it's my show and it's on YouTube and I can swear. So I don't think it has anything to do with experience that keeps you from doing stupid stuff. When someone decided that let's back into it. When people decided we should do a race experience, how did that conversation start? I have an idea, but how did it start?
I mean, to be super, open and honest about it, we're getting our butt kicked a little bit on the initial experience. People going to events like Lemons and Champ Car. I'll call it the first generation of race experience. Was just called Club Race Experience, and it came about in about 2015, about the same time we started Track Night. They said, look, we need something for these cars that are out here in running these other events and these drivers that are in these other events. We want to be able to invite them into the SCCA
Right.
And so that's when Club Race Experience was born. And then sometime around 2020, the year that went, I don't remember exactly because that year was so good at helping us remember what was going on. Um, we put our foot into the enduro world, and we came up with a team enduro concept that looked at what all of those other programs were doing, and we said let's present this from the SCCA. Let's take the cool things about SCCA, put them into an endurance package. And the more work we did on that, the more we learned that the other programs, when we're talking about, I'm going to call it low buck racing,
Sure.
because that's how it started. Not that it is, but that's how it started. Uh, when we look at that, what we really learned is that yes, endurance racing had something to do with it because you could share expenses, but the reality was it was a level of access
Right.
that was being sold. And when I stand in front of people, I say, how many steps does it take to go do an SCCA road race? And, I get a membership and a medical and a driver school and then a novice permit and so on and so forth. And you go to one of these other programs and it's like, well, a driver's license.
Yeah.
And so we knew we needed something like that. And once we learned that Team Enduro wasn't exactly that, I said, we have this other thing over here, this club race experience that was developed. Why don't we put the two together, kind of make club race experience more formal, call it race experience, have club race experience, which will be sprint races, and then endurance experience, which is endurance races. And let's attack this from an easy access standpoint. And instead of, hey, you did something dumb on a racetrack, which all of us are going to do at some time or another,
Yep.
let's penalize you hard. When somebody does something that's not exactly what you want them to do, let's turn it into a teachable moment. So let's not be punitive, let's be educational.
Yeah.
And that was the premise, really behind this new generation of race experience and how it came about.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. A couple things. I was one of those old school, got to have your schools kind of person. And until I spent 3 years hosting Inside Champ Car, I was dyed in the wool of this idea that we do it the right way. We're the SCCA. We've been doing it forever. We're the best. But I got a check to go host Inside Champ Car. And it's amazing how much you're willing to learn when someone's writing you a check. And I took the time to really see what they do and watch the races, and I've been to a couple of them. And I didn't see anything a whole lot different than what we were doing, except that there were a lot of people who didn't go through so many hoops to go racing who are having a blast at the racetrack. So when race experience popped up, I'm like, I wasn't one of those people, oh, we can't do it that way. I was like, okay, great. Finally, we're doing something to help get those types of people into our club.
Yeah, and that's where, that's what we know we needed. And things that are going on in the back end of, of motorsports economics and the business of motorsports when we talk about this is, SCCA, when we set up our licensing program, and look, it is a robust, amazing licensing program. When I went and got my competition license, I had to go to 2 schools.
Yep, me too.
When we think about what has happened in the last 20 or 30 years, particularly, there's more of a base of knowledge about what motorsports is that's just available to everybody. In 1988, if you wanted to go racing, if you didn't have a Porsche or a BMW, you weren't in one of those clubs, chances are the first SCCA race you showed up to was your first time at a racetrack.
Yep.
It was your first time even seeing a pit road. And now, between sim racing and the amount of television that covers racing, track days with so many organizations, that knowledge base of enthusiasts in general is way higher.
Yeah.
And so it turns out that while robust is good, you don't necessarily need to send everybody back to kindergarten to start it.
Yeah, definitely. And karting in the last 25 years. I mean, karting's always been there, but it wasn't quite as commonly used as it is today between, the K1 speed and, of course, you've got your old school traditional karting and with the kids coming up through that and seeing pro drivers talk about their karting experience. It's gotten parents and kids into that as well. So that's another thing that is a lot more prolific now than it used to be. So one other, if back to the honesty part, when I heard that we were going to do race experience and following what was really kind of an unsuccessful attempt at the endurance thing, I said to myself, okay, we got two. This is either going to be, it's going to work and they're going to figure it out, or not again. So what did you all learn from the kind of failed attempt at going into the endurance thing, which there were a lot of other players in already, that makes race experience successful?
So, good question, and it's one that honestly we talk about and think about every day. What if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results?
Yeah.
How are we going to make this different? The first thing is to focus on the access and not just that, hey, we're the SCCA, people are going to want to come to us. And there was certainly a little bit of that in the team enduro standpoint. It's, hey, everybody's doing these endurance things. Clearly, they will want to come run the SCCA. If we build it, they will come. And that's not necessarily the case, right? It's, with a lot of options out there, we are not necessarily the first choice like we might have been 20 years ago. And
Right.
and that's something
20
that
years
I
ago,
definitely,
we were the only choice.
we were the only choice. Yeah. And so now, my idea is that we still have, or our ideas are that we still have these, this robust set of regions and organizers, our trackside participants that are so passionate about this. And when we did Team Enduro, one of the things we were going to do is, okay, let's have a big national event. Let's have a national tour. And we realized that having a separate entity isn't necessarily what is going to work either. We want the regions to own this. We want the regions to embrace this and recognize that this is a new or another way of going club racing.
Yeah. How many events have happened now in this new iteration?
New iteration, let's call it 15 to 20, somewhere in there. New England region is the big, I'll call it a producer of these. They have 7 a year. I think last year there were 9 or 10 nationwide. Our biggest struggle right now is absolutely getting regions to host these events. And that's for a myriad of reasons. We could do an entire show on region economics as well.
Sure.
But it is not just because, I don't like to do it. It is because putting on events and opening up groups are a financial risk. And if you don't have the money to lose, you can't risk the money on a new event and building it, or else the event might go away. And so we're trying to do what we can with promotion. We're trying to do what we can with support and having regions do those, to help regions do those events.
All right, so let's dig into that. I'm Fun Region USA, and I have a racetrack, and it costs me $25,000 a day to rent this racetrack. And I'm barely breaking even, if I'm breaking even, to do my regular events. What is the selling point? What is the pitch to get me to give this a shot?
The first thing that we like to do, or that we try to push, is that right now there is not a lot of opportunity for a new driver to participate in an SCCA event. And for that, there's a little bit of a history lesson. In the 1970s, we had almost 60 driver schools a year in SCCA.
Yeah.
Every division had somewhere around one a month in the race season, so 6 to 8 driver schools. And so there was always an opportunity for a new person to do that. Last year we had 8
in the entire country.
in the entire country.
Yeah.
And there's some other, alternative driver schools where you can come in and be observed on a test day, but nothing formal.
Yeah.
And so if you want to go racing with the SCCA, and let's say it's March and the Buccaneer Region School was 2 months ago, and you say, hey, I just got my tax return and I'm going to go buy a race car and I'm going to go racing. The answer then is, well, next February you can come run, or maybe you can go to a Sebring school, but
Right.
there's not this constant churn. And so my first selling point to regions is we have got to figure out a way to invite that first timer to a road race event and enable them to come out and go wheel to wheel. It's it's almost like we would do a track night. Have a novice group inside of your road race
Yeah.
weekend. We don't Race experience is not only for novices. I like to say it's for the casual racer, but it certainly works for novices as well.
So does this have to be a whole weekend dedicated to race experience?
No, absolutely not. It's what I like to do is ask regions to have a run group. So, if group one is, formula cars, and group two is spec racer Fords, and group three is spec Miata, and group
Right.
four is race experience. And then, we like to get, the races don't have to be as long. What we've been suggesting is a couple of 15-minute practice sessions and a 20-minute race in the course of a day is a really good cycle for a new person. We don't have to have that 35 or 40-minute race that a more veteran racer might want.
And what does it take to administer that? Does it take a person to be able to do some, making sure you know what a flag is and what to do when you see it? Is there a online test that they have to take before they could participate? What's the system?
So we have an online test that now is required for any of our new drivers as part of the learning management system that SCCA has, but that is not necessary. Typically, what we do require outside of you're going to need somebody to lead the event. You're going to need a race director. You're going to need a safety steward. You're going to need a tech inspector. Those are the big four in terms of your kind of traditional SCCA pieces. But then a driver coach or driver coaches. And so this past weekend at VIR, we had the endurance experience. We had 4 brand new drivers that had come out that hadn't run before, 3 that had not run before, and 1 that had 1 race experience event under their belt. And when we did the drivers meeting, we have 5 minutes of the general overview stuff, and then
Right.
we say, okay, if you're a veteran driver, if you've got more than 3 weekends, you can head on out. And then we stayed in there for about 40 minutes and
Yeah.
talked to the newbies, and we talked about flags, and we talked about racecraft, and we talk about strategies of when and how to look in the mirrors, and that rhythm that you get in to make sure that people are seeing their mirrors and the flags and all that stuff while they're driving around a racetrack.
So you've done half a dozen events, 18 events or so. What's the safety record?
Boy, you're gonna like, what is it? I tell people I'm not superstitious, but I'm a race car driver.
Mm-hmm.
So far it's been really good. The first of the events that I've worked, we had one spin where a Miata broke a tie rod bouncing over a curb. That was the first damage that I know of. And then this weekend we did have a crash in the endurance experience at VIR. It was one of the licensed drivers who drove off track to avoid another licensed driver who was spinning. So I never like to see anybody have a bad event, but at the same
Right.
time, there's a little bit of like it wasn't one of the new folks.
I asked that question because it's my experience, and I have a very interesting lens that I get to look through. I have had an opportunity to watch almost every race in almost every Super Tour for now almost 3 years. These are, in most cases, the best drivers in all of our club, the most experienced drivers in a lot of cases in all of our club. And some of the craziest, nuttiest things I've seen on a racetrack have happened during these Super Tours. It's also my experience that new people don't want to screw up, that new people don't want to get a reputation, especially if they're a little bit older. Sometimes kids don't know any better. I'm sorry. I was there. You were a teenager once. Kids sometimes don't know. But if you're an older person, 25, you don't want to be the person who's screwing up other people's race. So maybe your situational awareness isn't what it could be because you don't have the experience, but you're not going out there to be reckless or stupid in most cases. And that's why these programs seem to work in my mind. Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, for the most part, people don't want to crash their race cars.
Right.
When we joke about the $6 trophy, and some series it becomes a $15 trophy, and the level of aggression goes up a little bit. And I don't want to disparage Super Tour drivers or runoffs drivers, but in a lot of cases you're there to win. You're there to take some more risks. And we mentioned Tom O'Gorman earlier. Tom introduced me to a great thing. That first year on Track Night, he said, "Hey, I think I found the word for the drivers' meeting that really helps us have a better event." I said, "Well, what'd you find?" And he said, "It's using the word expectation." And I said, "Okay, more words." And he said, "Look, everybody has all these drivers' meetings that talk about don't do this, don't do that, don't go off, don't spin, don't crash, don't whatever." And he said, I introduced this concept where I said, here's what we expect of you today. We expect you to look in your mirrors, to give point buys. And it was a real sort of paradigm shift moment to kind of see how setting an expectation verbally changes how people drive. And, so when we go to a race experience event, you can sit up and you can say, look, this is what we expect of you. And you can say, we don't expect you to go 11/10ths.
Right.
We don't expect you to race like you're racing for a runoffs win. This is casual racing, and we expect something different. And that it gives everybody a permission, whether it's that brand new person or it's the veteran. And we had Franklin Futrell, multi-time runoffs winner, running the race experience at Road Atlanta last year. It gives everybody that permission to go, okay, I can back off just a little bit. And so, yep, it's the new folks that don't want to crash, and it's also just okay, this is a different event. I can be different here. I don't have to be under so much pressure.
Right. I always tell people you can go home with a $10 trophy. You could go home with a $20,000 bill to fix your car. It's a decision making, and obviously stuff just happens. Cars break, people do something, and you can't avoid a wreck. But that's always part of how you think about when you approach our events. And I like that expectation because, when someone tells you don't, well, you'll want to do it.
Right. And you tense up.
Yeah.
When people are scolding you, you immediately go, I better not. And we know from driving and coaching and instructing, that when you are tense in a race car, it shows it, in your driving line, in your braking, in the decisions you make. And you want to convey that it's serious, but you also want to convey that relaxing and bringing it down a notch is okay. And that's why I think these events work. Is whether it's one of the other the alternate organizations or whether it's us setting that tone and setting those expectations differently from how we would when we're saying, look, you're going to go qualify for the runoffs, helps those events take a different tone.
Yeah. I think this is also one of those opportunities, and I advocate for this, and I wish we did it a whole lot more. And some of the other organizations that go out and do what they do, part of the reason that they're successful is because they do a lot of stuff on a race weekend. You're not always just going for the one thing. And it's expensive to rent racetracks, no matter where it is, even if it's a club-owned track like we have out here with Cal Club or Thunder Hill or Rebling Road. It's still expensive to run a weekend. And I don't understand why on maybe once a year or more often, regions don't try to do a one mega event where you have an autocross course, you have your road racing, you'll do maybe race experience, a track day session, and if you really want to get wacky and crazy, invite your road rally folks to have a Saturday night road rally and make sure that the crew members are the driver and your driver is the navigator. Crazy. That could be fun.
And we've actually had a couple regions try that. The most successful is Steel Cities, up there at Pittsburgh International Race Complex. And sometimes the reason why a region wouldn't is because of the facility.
Right.
if it doesn't have the appropriate autocross pad. But that Steel Cities event a couple years ago, they did have a driver school. They had time trials. They had autocross. They had road rally. They had road racing. And I think at the end of the weekend, it was 605 SCCA entries
Wow.
across the spectrum of classes that we had there. And it was just, to us, I mean, we're sitting there going, man, the Solo Nationals is the biggest. And then this
Yeah.
regional event, and then the runoffs, and then the June sprints, and so it can be done. There are, when you get into a region and you get into their niche,
Right.
you can look at regions almost as like small businesses. They really are small businesses,
Right.
and they have products. And if that product is time trial, or that product is autocross, or that product is road racing, it can be hard to expand because that means more labor, more expertise. And so in those cases, it's a matter of putting the right folks together to be able to do that. And that is
Yeah.
why my big long title is, senior manager of region track program development, because
There it is.
it is all there it is. Yep. Because it is all of those things. When the region says, hey, we need 120 cars to break even, and we've been getting 115, we don't think we're going to be able to do this event. I get to say, hey, let me help you put a track day. Let me help you put a time trial into this as part of this. Let's talk about a race experience group. And that's why the title is long, because the tools in the toolbox are many.
Yeah, I don't think regions should do it all the time, because I know when I'm at the road race, I can't solo my car. So I like that they're on different weekends so that I can go run an autocross when I'm not on the same. So it's not practical to do it all the time, but maybe once a year, just to get everybody together and have a moment, or maybe even every other year. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, it's I'm a huge fan of that, and I hope we see regions doing more of that. And for the folks in the regions out there, if you want help with that, here I am.
What have I not asked? We've covered a lot of ground here. What have I not asked, or what have we not talked about that we should have?
Man, you talked in the top of the show about stirring up controversy with this, and and so I've heard today somebody saying, "Well, I'm not really a fan of that program. I don't think we want to do that." And the fear is, how do you put licensed and unlicensed drivers together?
Mhm.
Are the different attitudes going to change? What happens on track? Is it going to make it more dangerous? That's the worry. And so we've kind of covered it, but I'll take the moment just to say that when you set the expectations right, when you've got the driver coaches there to help the new people get up to speed, and help the veterans understand that it is a different program, then that's where you make the event work. That's how the
Yeah.
event works. And when somebody comes in and does race experience, and they sit up and they go like, hey man, the class is for race experience. I think you should have a class like this. The great news there is we don't have to send them to another organization like an alternate org. What we can say, oh, you want to be more serious in race experience? Have you met the SARC series? Have
Right.
you met majors? Have you met Super Tour? There are places that if people come in and start, we've got a family of events to be able to help them find. And then the other thing is we have made race experience part of the official licensing process
That was going to be my
for.
next question.
Yep. So, again, when you take in all this experience, I got asked today in an email. I said, "Hey, I want to come to the event at AMP that's coming up on May 31st and June 1st. What am I going to get my novice license? Am I going to get my driver school credit signed off?" And our answer is, look, if you've got a bunch of alternate org events, if you've got a bunch of time trials, odds are pretty good that in a weekend of race experience, we're going to see enough. We're going to see race starts. We're going to see racecraft that lets us know whether or not you're ready. If race experience is your first event, or maybe you've only done a couple of track days, it might take you a few race experience events. But those events are there to, you can either stay in race experience for as long as you want, or you can use it as that licensing process. It does count as the driver school that we require, or it can count as a driver school that we require to go into your novice permit, and then you go race your regional events on the novice permit to build up to that full competition license.
Got it. Got it. So it is formalized now as part of a way for someone to go. I mean, that alone with no schools in a lot of regions. We don't have a school out here in Southern California, and we run one of the biggest regions in the country. That alone makes me think it's something that would be advantageous to do once or twice a year at the least.
Yeah, that is our hope. I mean, our kind of, I'll call it our dream, but really the optimal is we'd love to see, you know, an event a month or every other month in any division, right? So you don't have to wait long to get that first experience, right?
Right.
We know the big event at Sebring or the June sprints, like races, it's not appropriate to have race
Sure.
experience as a part of something like that. But those regional events that, we're about 60% of track capacity, right? Those are the ones that this can be used as a fill-in and as a chance to invite new folks into the SCCA. And you never know what's going to happen. I had Rob came out to an event last year. He's 800 horsepower time attack Audi, and he came out to a race experience. He rented Blair Deffenbaugh's B-Spec car, and he came in as you know what, I'm just going to go like road race to say I road raced. And he came in after the first race that we did on Saturday, and he had this 1,000-yard stare in his eye as he sat there at impound. And I said, "Hey, are you okay?" And he said, "I get it now." And I said, "Yeah." And then he looked at me and he said, "This is going to be expensive."
Right.
And within a few months, he had he bought his own B-Spec fit. And he got his novice permit and he's been racing it. I think actually right now, an email just popped up from him, getting him transferred to his full competition license. And that's a guy that, 6 months ago, "No, I'm going to go do this once, but it's not my thing." So it's so exciting to me to provide those opportunities. Look, if Rob had never come back to another event or if he had only run race experience, that's okay too. But also to see him find something that he didn't think he was going to find was just, like you say, goosebumps.
Yeah. Yeah. For years, I've called Track Night the entry drug into the SCCA. And this feels like it's another class of entry drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. So we did Track Night and then we sort of resculpted time trials in 2018. And about halfway through that year, somebody said, "Well, this is just Track Night with timing." And I looked at them and said, "So?"
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't sound like an insult to me. And I haven't heard it yet, but I'm kind of waiting for somebody to say, "Well, race experience is just Track Night with wheel to wheel."
Yeah.
And, to me, that would be about the best compliment we could get because it's a way to make things easy, to make things fun. It can be your step. It can be your bucket list check off. It can be your motorsports home. All of those things can be true.
I mean, for a region that may have 100 or 125 cars on a race weekend, it just doesn't make any sense to not try it.
I'm going to quote you on that, right?
Yeah.
When I'm talking to the regions, because like I say, it gets, when you've got that 120 cars and 115 cars means you don't get to come have the race again next year because you lost too much money. And the ask is, well, let's have a race experience event. And so maybe you're combining two road race groups. And so maybe you lose some entries there. And what if the race experience group doesn't make up at least that many entries? Look, I totally understand the financial risk for a region as a small business. One of the things that we really try to promote hard is that regions put the events on the calendar, commit to having them, and then those of us in the national office really want to push the message so that somebody can find it in November and plan to be there, even if the event's in June or July or August.
So Track Night in America has its own website.
Yep.
How do people who aren't part of our club find this as their possibility to get in?
So we're working on new, better
Yeah.
with the website, of course. The greatest thing about the SCCA is how many programs it has when it comes to having a website with the, when you count, trackside things like corner working as programs, which they really are, there's 9 different programs that the SCCA has.
Yeah.
And that makes it tough. Race Experience doesn't have its own website, and we're in a chicken or the egg sort of situation right now with, I feel like if we can have regions have the events and then we can talk about them, whether it's in social media, whether it's on podcasts, whether it's in, articles in Grassroots Motorsports or something like that, and people come to them and we have great events. I would like us, or we would like to see us get to the point where when somebody jumps on a Facebook thread and goes, man, I want to start racing, where do I go? The answer from all of the people is you need to find an SCCA Race Experience event.
Yeah.
And that comes with having the events and then just sending everybody home with huge smiles after doing the events and
Right.
building to that in over the next 3 to 5 years, let's say.
I'm going to put you on the spot here just for a second. I'm going to put all the list of the upcoming events in our show notes. And I'm going to ask you, as new events are put on the books, to shoot me an email. And I will try to commit to continually update these show notes so that people can find out where the most recent events are going to be. It's a little bit of work on my end. It's a little bit of work on your end. But I think it would be worthwhile so that whenever someone watches this podcast, they can just pop in the show notes and say, okay, there's one coming up in my area soon.
That's awesome. And if we happen to miss one, I talk about us not having a dedicated website for it, but scca.com/racex is the kind of the homepage for it, the short URL. And there we have a schedule that, as long as regions have those events calendared and in that SCCA system, they'll also show up there. But 2 places sounds better than one. So
and I will put that link in the show. Yeah, I'll put that link in the show notes also, just in case you and I get behind or we just flat give up. People,
I don't plan on giving up.
Yeah, well, at least exchanging the information. I don't think the program's going anywhere, but sometimes getting everything kept up to date is tough. But I'll definitely put that link then, and then people can always go to that, and that'll be the most updated information. That's probably easier anyway.
Excellent. Love that idea.
Yeah. Jon, it's been fun. This is a good program.
Yes.
Everything I've heard from the people who've actually done it has been positive. And many things I've heard from the people who haven't done it is out of not trying it and not actually having the experience with it. And like anything, taking from putting your toe in the water to actually jumping in the water is scary. I hope more regions take that shot, take that dive, and do it. And I think it's a good way to help grow our club. And, us old folks aren't getting any younger. We need to get more people coming in. So I think it's a good idea.
I absolutely, of course, I agree with you, and I appreciate the time to be on here and to talk about it. And, whether you're a region or if you're a driver thinking about, doing it, if you email us at the SCCA, those emails will find their way to my inbox, and I'm happy to answer questions, whether it's a region saying, hey, how do we do it? Or whether it's a driver saying, man, help me find one. What do I need?
Yep. So, as is always the case, if you have updates, if there's news, you get a hold of me. We'll do another podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time and joining me for the show.
Appreciate you having me on.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you saw, if you like what you heard, join the RacingWire Podcast Network or join the Racing Network on YouTube. Click the bell, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff so you know when the next show is. If you like what you heard, leave a comment on social media, leave a comment on the show notes. That would be awesome. There's a new Inside the SCCA every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a great week. Have fun and go play with cars.